Imagine standing at the edge of a medieval cliffside town in the dead of night, where time feels ancient and the air hums with a silence too perfect to be real. Suddenly, above the sanctuary where saints once prayed and secrets once festered, the sky cracks open with light, a spiraling bloom of luminescent blue, twisting like a slow-motion cyclone of glass and fire. Everything stops. The wind, the birds, the breath in your throat. Devices die. Watches freeze. The stars above flicker like candles in a vacuum. And just for a moment, it feels as if the universe is watching you back. Then it vanishes. But what you saw never leaves you. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. The date was April 16, 2024. The world had been captivated by a viral video of orange-red orbs dancing above the Adriatic Sea, just off the Puglia coast. But 60 kilometers inland, shielded by pine forests and limestone ridges, another story had begun. One that no one talked about. Monte Sant'Angelo sat under a full moon that night, its cobbled streets whispering history and old Catholic prayers. Beneath the cliffs, silence ruled. No tourists. No pilgrims. Just wind curling between ancient stone. At 2:11 in the morning, a nurse named Lucia walked home from the hospital. Her shoes tapped against the path as she looked up and froze. Above the cliff, a band of pale blue light spiraled into view. Not moving fast. Not flashing. Just rotating. Like breath. It seemed to hover over the sanctuary entrance, the ancient cave where Saint Michael was once said to have appeared. Lucia blinked, thinking it was fatigue. But when her smartwatch went dark and the street lamp beside her fizzled out in silence, she knew something wasn't right. Elsewhere, Gianni sat on his balcony. A retired physics teacher and hobbyist astronomer, he had seen every celestial pattern known to man. But nothing like this. He stared through binoculars, trying to determine if it was a drone, a trick, a reflection. What he saw, he later described in a handwritten journal as a breathing Fibonacci spiral, rotating on a vertical axis like a standing whirlpool made of liquid light. In those 92 seconds, the town held its breath. Digital clocks stopped. Radios went mute. Dogs remained quiet. The blue spiral began to pulse, very slowly, casting a faint glow over rooftops. The light didn't scatter, it enveloped. Every object in the vicinity seemed outlined in soft azure, like a pencil sketch under a moonbeam. Then, one pulse. Two. A third. And the light folded inward, collapsing on itself in perfect symmetry, then vanished without a sound. Not into the distance, but into itself. Like a pocket closing in space. By 2:13, it was gone. Most residents had slept through it. Only a handful saw the event with clarity. Fewer still believed what they had seen. And none of them would forget it. That morning, everything seemed normal again. But Lucia couldn't unlock her phone. Gianni's analog wristwatch was still frozen at 2:12. A local carabinieri officer reported a flicker in the police station's camera feed, a 92-second black bar in an otherwise uneventful night. No one connected the dots. Not yet. By afternoon, attention had returned to the coastal sightings. The shimmering orbs, the smartphone video, the military speculation. The world had its headline. But in Monte Sant'Angelo, the event took root, not in the media, but in the minds of those who lived through it. And by evening, rumors had begun. Not about what was seen, but who had come afterward. The following morning unfolded slowly in Monte Sant'Angelo. The early sun dusted the rooftops in golden light, and the town began its usual quiet rhythm. Market vendors opened shutters. A church bell rang. Bread ovens came alive. And yet, beneath the surface, something had changed. At 8:27 a.m., 2 black vehicles arrived in town. They didn't use the main road, but came through the winding northern pass, a route typically used only by locals or those who knew the terrain well. The first was a matte black SUV with tinted windows. The second, a discreet van with no visible plates, parked just behind it. Both vehicles stopped at the foot of the sanctuary steps. No one stepped out for several minutes. By the time the town had taken notice, 4 men emerged. Their appearance was unremarkable: dark jackets, sunglasses, and unbranded hiking boots. But their presence struck something odd in the air, as if they walked with the quiet authority of people who expected no questions. Lucia, the nurse, saw them first. She was having coffee near the church square when she noticed 2 of the men entering the sanctuary grounds. The other 2 circled the rear perimeter. They didn't carry equipment. They didn't speak to anyone. What caught her eye was that they avoided the security camera mounted above the bell tower, as if they knew exactly where not to be seen. By 10:30, the sanctuary was quietly closed to visitors. A sign said maintenance, but the groundskeeper hadn't been notified, nor had the priest. Inside the sanctuary's subterranean chapel, the air was thick and damp. Candles flickered unnaturally despite no breeze. Locals believed the cave carried echoes of St. Michael's original apparition, a spiritual place untouched by time. But for the men in black, it was something else entirely. One of them carried a compact scanning device no larger than a book. It emitted a faint, rhythmic chirp, like sonar, but compressed and high-pitched. They walked slowly through the cave, stopping near a small iron gate that marked the original altar, the site where the blue spiral had hovered just hours before. The device began to blink red. One of the men removed a metallic instrument from his jacket and pointed it at the stone floor. It produced no beam, but a soft vibration filled the air. The kind that you don't hear, but feel in your chest. Outside, Gianni LaRusso stood at a distance, binoculars at his chest, watching. He wasn't hiding, but he was waiting. He had seen men like this before, not in person, but in post-incident photos circulated on obscure forums. Military contractors, ex-intelligence operatives, even rumored deep state teams tasked with containment. What worried him wasn't that they had come. It was how quickly they had come. Less than 10 hours after the event. At noon, a man from the vehicles approached the town's telecommunications tower. He spoke briefly to the technician on duty, who seemed confused, then dismissed. The man entered the access cabin and stayed there for 23 minutes. Later that evening, the technician found something peculiar. The system's diagnostic logs had been wiped clean, from exactly 1:30 to 3:15 in the morning. Everything recorded before and after was intact. Only the time window around the spiral was missing. That night, Lucia received a knock at her apartment door. It was subtle. No shouting. No urgency. When she opened it, there was no one there. Only a white envelope on the ground. No markings. Inside, a single photograph. It showed the sanctuary steps. From above. From an angle that no one in the town could have taken. In the sky above the steps was a faint blur, a spiral, barely visible, caught mid-pulse. And on the back of the photo, typed in crisp black ink, it did not come from the sky. By the next morning, the vehicles were gone. But the silence they left behind was louder than anything the town had ever heard. 2 days passed. Monte Sant'Angelo resumed its surface normalcy, but the undercurrent of anxiety had thickened. Those who had seen the light said little now. Something in them had shifted. Lucia avoided the sanctuary entirely. Gianni spent hours on his rooftop, scanning frequencies, watching shadows. Something told him the event wasn't over. On the 3rd night after the spiral, a local spelunker named Matteo Greco descended into the lower catacombs near the sanctuary cliff wall. Not the chapel level known to tourists, but the deep, unmarked tunnel sealed since the late 1800s after a partial collapse. Matteo had found a forgotten entrance behind an overgrown wall near the base of the cliff. The entry was narrow, but the markings above the archway, worn Latin script chiseled by monks, were unmistakable. Lux sub terra. The light beneath the earth. He was alone, headlamp on, equipment bag clipped to his belt. The air was stale and tight. Dust clung to his breath. At 50 meters, the tunnel veered sharply and widened into a gallery chamber. What Matteo saw there was not man-made. The walls were lined with smooth, curved indentations, not carved, but formed, as if by heat or force. Patterns radiated outward, fractal and geometric, like branching lightning veins captured in stone. Lichtenberg figures. He took photos. He stepped carefully. Then his headlamp flickered, and the ground beneath him vibrated. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't loud. It was steady, like a heartbeat, pulsing every 4 seconds. For pulses, then nothing. Matteo froze. The chamber ahead glowed faintly. Not from his lamp. From the rock itself. A soft, bluish hue. Then, as if cued by his presence, a sound, impossible to place, filled the tunnel. Not quite mechanical, not natural either. It was low, guttural, and wet, like the grinding of deep ice under pressure. He turned. He ran. Later that night, breathless and shaking, Matteo showed his camera footage to Gianni. The footage stopped during the glow. A corrupted segment marked with digital noise. But one frame, a single image before the cut, showed something strange. In the corner of the chamber wall was a symbol. A spiral, etched deep, precise, symmetrical. Surrounding it were smaller spiral glyphs, all pointing inward. Gianni didn't speak. He simply printed the image and pinned it on his office board next to the photo Lucia had received. The spiral in both was identical. The next day, the overgrown tunnel entrance was gone. Sealed. Concrete. Fresh. When Matteo returned to show a friend, he found a pile of stone rubble and caution tape. A sign reading geological hazard. No official seal. No local authority had signed off on the closure. He called Lucia. She came quietly, camera in hand, and documented everything. But that night, her phone went missing from her apartment while she slept. Not stolen. Just gone. No signs of forced entry. No disturbance. Only one thing left behind, a scrap of paper, folded and placed on her windowsill. It read, "Not buried. Guarded." Word began to spread in whispers through the town that something beneath the sanctuary, beneath Monte Sant'Angelo itself, had awakened. Or had been waiting. Gianni began corresponding with a physics contact in Turin. A woman named Dr. Amelia Neri. A fringe theorist specializing in geospatial anomalies and deep field magnetism. She had once claimed that certain geological fault lines could act as energy conduits, storing and occasionally releasing anomalous electromagnetic events. Her paper was rejected by every academic journal. But Gianni believed her. He sent her the photos, the footage, the symbols. She responded within the hour. That formation, that pulse frequency, I've only seen it once. Antarctica, December 2019. She included coordinates, but they led to a black zone on every satellite map. And so a new question emerged. What connected a forgotten chamber under a medieval Italian sanctuary to one of the most isolated places on Earth? And why had the spiral returned, here, now? Gianni stared at the message from Dr. Amelia Neri well into the night. Antarctica, December 2019. The coordinates led to a blank space, not censored, but blurred. An obfuscation embedded in every public and private satellite feed, including those used by scientific institutions. He checked archived imagery. The region had been unavailable since January 2020. There were no explanations. No metadata. Just silence. By 3 in the morning, Gianni had printed the blurred zone and pinned it beside the spiral glyphs in his study. The two spirals, one chiseled in stone beneath Monte Sant'Angelo, the other buried in ice at the end of the world, seemed to speak to each other across time and matter. The next day, he met Lucia at the old bell tower, away from curious ears. He showed her the image of the Antarctica spiral, sketched by Amelia from memory. Lucia's face paled. "That's it," she said, tapping the drawing with trembling fingers. "That's the pattern the lights made in the sky, before they disappeared." Gianni nodded. "This isn't just light. This is structure." Later that evening, Dr. Neri called. Her voice was brittle, as if she had rehearsed each word in private. She warned that she had received an unusual inquiry earlier that day, someone posing as a university contact requesting her private correspondence log. The only name they mentioned was Gianni's. She told him to be careful. "Whatever's beneath that town," she said, "it's not isolated. It's part of a network, a geometry of recurrence." She paused. "They're not here to observe us. They're using us, the land, the rock, the pressure zones, as lenses." Before Gianni could respond, the line cut out. That night, thunder rolled over Monte Sant'Angelo for the first time in weeks. Not rain, not storm, just thunder, sudden and strange. There was no lightning, no clouds, just sky rumbling like it had a voice. At exactly 2:11 a.m., every motion sensor in the town square triggered. Dogs howled in unison. Church bells rang without being touched. And for 7 seconds, a faint hum rose beneath the earth. Lucia, who had left her bedroom window open, was jolted awake by a sound she described later as a choral resonance, like a choir singing beneath concrete. She wasn't alone. Across the region, several residents, scattered across towns as far as Foggia and Vieste, reported dreams that night. Not ordinary dreams, but visceral, lucid visions. In one, a schoolteacher stood inside a blue chamber that pulsed like a living lung. In another, a farmer watched himself from above as a spiral of light wrapped around his home, lifting it skyward. And a child drew, without knowing why, a perfect replica of the symbol found on the sanctuary floor, spiral within spiral, encased in vertical arcs. The drawings made their way to Gianni the next morning. He laid them out on his dining table. 5 different hands. Same geometry. Patterns that shouldn't match, but did. He made a call to Amelia's secondary number. No answer. He tried her email. Bounced. Her university profile. Wiped. As if she had never been there. Gianni began to pace. His thoughts raced back to the phrase left on Lucia's window. Not buried. Guarded. But guarded by whom? Or by what? He began to suspect that whatever lay beneath Monte Sant'Angelo had never truly been dormant. That the blue spiral was not a signal from elsewhere, but an echo from within. A release. A warning. A door opening. At dusk, Gianni returned to the sanctuary. The courtyard was empty. The sky tinted orange. And as he approached the iron gate where the spiral had once hovered, he noticed something he hadn't before. A small, almost imperceptible indentation in the stone threshold. A groove, shaped like an eye. Perfectly symmetrical. Not carved. Formed. He knelt down. Touched it. The stone was warm. Not from sun, but from within. And for just a moment, he thought he heard something behind the gate. Breathing. Low. Rhythmic. Like something waiting to be remembered. 3 nights later, the sky above Monte Sant'Angelo cleared to an unnatural clarity. No clouds. No moon. Just stars, so sharp, so bright, they seemed painted on glass. Gianni stayed awake, pacing between his telescope and the pages of Amelia Neri's archived forum posts, the ones that had escaped deletion. One post stood out. Titled Lenses of the Lithosphere, it outlined the theory that certain geological formations acted like natural signal amplifiers, resonating structures that could project or receive data, even consciousness, if manipulated by external forces. Her hypothesis ended with a chilling line. They will not knock. The door is already open. That same night, in the wooded outskirts below the town, a group of teenagers camping illegally near the limestone cliffs stumbled into something that hadn't been there before. At approximately 11:45 p.m., they heard a low-frequency hum. One described it as a bone-deep vibration that felt like it was inside your chest instead of your ears. Thinking it was an approaching vehicle or a passing train, they stepped out of their tent, but saw nothing. Then the trees began to glow. Not brightly. Subtly. As if bioluminescent veins were running up their bark. The glow traced upward and vanished into the canopy, then spread across the rocks, forming curved paths in a spiral pattern. Before anyone could react, one of the teens collapsed. He convulsed for 7 seconds, then went limp. When his friends reached him, he was conscious, wide-eyed, whispering a single phrase in Latin he had never learned. Vident nos. They see us. He recovered, but remembered nothing of the event. His friends, however, recorded the glowing patterns on their phones. When Gianni was shown the footage the next morning, he noticed something chilling. The spiral glows weren't random. They matched the glyphs on the chamber wall. But more disturbingly, they pulsed in a sequence. Binary. Lucia had once worked in a neurology unit before transferring to the small-town hospital. She translated the pulses into data. 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1. She handed Gianni the paper. 7 ones. 3 zeros. Repeating. A binary encoding. Gianni ran the string through every conversion tool he knew. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a name. It was a coordinate. He mapped it. The point landed not far from town, in a disused monastery garden that had been abandoned since World War II. That evening, just before twilight, Gianni and Lucia walked there. The gates were rusted shut, the ground overgrown, the air strangely sterile. In the center of the clearing stood an obelisk, just over 2 meters tall, made of polished black stone. Neither remembered it ever being mentioned in town records. No plaques. No markings. But the surface bore something unmistakable under angled light. Spiral etchings. Barely visible. Burned into the stone like lightning scars. Lucia reached out. Her hand stopped an inch from the surface. The stone was vibrating. Very slowly. Very faintly. But unmistakably. Then, footsteps. From the far side of the garden, a figure emerged. Not hurried. Not hesitant. An older man, perhaps in his 60s, wearing a gray coat and round wire glasses. He said nothing at first. Simply observed. Gianni broke the silence. "You're not from here." The man gave a thin smile. "Neither are you. Not anymore." Lucia asked him who he was. "I used to be a translator," he said, "of ancient things. But now I watch." "Watch what?" Gianni asked. The man gestured at the obelisk. "This is one of the beacons. There are 7. 4 are still asleep. And the others?" Lucia asked. The man's eyes sharpened. "They've been waking. One by one. Italy, Greenland, Chile. The ice listens, just like the stone." Gianni felt his pulse slow. "What do they transmit?" he asked. The man looked up at the darkening sky. "They don't transmit," he whispered. "They receive." A long silence followed. Then the man turned and began walking into the trees. Before vanishing into shadow, he said one last thing. "They aren't here for us. They're here for what's underneath us." The garden fell silent again. Lucia stepped back. Her hand still tingled from the air around the beacon. Beneath them, in the stone, a low pulse returned. 4 seconds apart. The same rhythm as before. But this time, it was louder. That night, the pulse beneath Monte Sant'Angelo grew stronger. It was no longer subtle, no longer a vibration buried deep in the stone. The rhythm could now be felt in the soles of one's feet while walking the older parts of town. Near the sanctuary, the cliff's edge, the underground well behind the monastery. Locals began to mention it, cautiously. Some called it the heartbeat of the hill. Others, mostly the elderly, whispered the word risveglio, the awakening. Gianni's sleep broke in fragments. He dreamed of spirals again, but this time not in the sky. In his mind. As if something had grafted the symbol onto his consciousness. The next morning, he found an unexpected email waiting for him. No address. No subject. Just an attachment. A short video. It showed satellite telemetry, infrared layers superimposed over a map of southern Italy. At first glance, the land appeared quiet. Then, slowly, a circular signal began to bloom beneath Monte Sant'Angelo. A heat signature not from surface weather, nor from tectonic activity. It pulsed in perfect intervals, 7 kilometers wide. When Gianni slowed the footage frame by frame, he noticed something impossible. Each pulse subtly distorted the satellite's timestamp, a ripple in the timestamp font itself. The numbers bent, warped slightly, then returned to normal. He reran the video. Again. And again. The anomaly was consistent. He called Lucia. Within hours, she brought over an MRI scan taken at the hospital 2 nights prior, a patient who had complained of vertigo after walking near the sanctuary steps. The scan was clean, except for one strange detail. The patient's neural activity spiked rhythmically, every 4 seconds, even while unconscious, even after leaving the site. That rhythm again. Lucia compared it to Gianni's data. The pulses matched in timing, but not in origin. One was magnetic, the other cerebral. Something beneath them was synchronizing with the human brain. She contacted a former colleague, a neurologist in Bari who studied acoustic resonance in neural tissue. When she sent him the dataset, he called her within 20 minutes. "Where did this come from?" he asked sharply. She hesitated. The man lowered his voice. "This waveform matches what we detected at the Murmansk array last year. The Russian site that went dark." Lucia looked to Gianni. The Murmansk array had been a classified listening post, now abandoned without explanation after a mysterious signal outage in 2023. The official story claimed equipment failure, but independent analysts had long suspected something else. The neurologist spoke again. "Are you near one of the receivers?" Lucia asked what he meant. "The stone. The formation. The frequency vector isn't outbound. It's inward. Like it's pulling." "Pulling what?" she asked. But he never answered. The line cut out. That evening, Lucia and Gianni sat in the bell tower once more, looking down at the sanctuary. Gianni held a hand-drawn map, the 7 beacon sites Amelia had mentioned before she vanished. He traced a line between them. They formed an arc. Not a straight one, a curve. A planetary circuit. And at the center of the arc was southern Italy. Lucia whispered what both of them were thinking. "This isn't just a node. It's the keystone." Suddenly, the bell tower's old wooden beams began to creak. Softly at first, then louder, like a ship shifting under pressure. Gianni stood, looked out the window. The street below was empty, but the shadow that passed across the sanctuary's gate didn't belong to anything visible. It moved unnaturally, fluid, elongated, like something caught between states. The air in the room changed. It grew thick, charged, and then the bell, untouched, rang once. Lucia covered her ears. The sound didn't echo. It reverberated, not through the air, but through the mind. Images flashed behind her closed eyes. A tunnel made of light. A spiral chamber filled with silhouettes. A hand reaching toward her, not to harm, but to show. When she opened her eyes again, she was on the floor. Gianni helped her up. His voice shook. "I saw it too." Lucia didn't ask what. She knew. Beneath the sanctuary, beneath the limestone, something was opening. Not a structure. A memory. Not ours. Something else's. And it had waited a long time to be remembered. By morning, the pulse had vanished. Gone from the ground, the air, the mind. Monte Sant'Angelo felt hollow, like a song that had ended mid-note. But Gianni and Lucia both knew better. The silence wasn't an ending. It was an intake of breath. Something had changed during the bell's single ring. Gianni felt it in his bones, a dislocation of perception, like he no longer belonged entirely to his own timeline. His reflection in the mirror blinked half a second too late. Light hit his eyes in the wrong direction. Time had bent. Slightly, but undeniably. Lucia noticed it too. People at the hospital were slower. Not mentally, temporally. Conversations lagged. Actions repeated. One nurse refilled the same vial twice, forgetting she had already done it. And in the center of the sanctuary grounds, an outline had appeared. On the stone floor where the spiral once hovered, now was a pattern etched in soot. Fine, circular, and layered like tree rings. No one admitted to putting it there. No tools were found. The stone itself hadn't been damaged, just marked. Gianni called it the archive print. He believed the spiral, the pulse, the signal, they weren't random. They were triggers. Unlocking something ancient, embedded not in stone or metal, but in information itself. A pre-coded geometry buried beneath layers of time and perception. Lucia, haunted by her visions, suggested an experiment. She brought in a modified EEG headset from the hospital. She placed it on herself, connected to an open neural decoder on Gianni's laptop. Then she asked him to show her the photo, the spiral glyph from the catacombs. As soon as her eyes locked on the pattern, the machine sparked. Her brainwaves surged into a new range. Not gamma. Not delta. Something unclassified. The screen flooded with characters. Symbols. Not Italian. Not Latin. Not even letters. Patterns. They printed themselves across the screen like automatic writing. A pulse between thought and machine. Then Lucia began to whisper. Gianni typed everything she said. The words came slowly at first. Archive, awaken, lattice memory, listener node 13, memory key breached, waiting, decoding. Then her eyes rolled back. Her body jerked once. And she collapsed into the chair. She woke 40 seconds later, breathless, sweat slicking her skin. No memory of speaking. But she held an image in her mind, of a city made of translucent towers, suspended in a violet sky, with rivers of light running not through land, but through thought itself. She began to cry, not from fear, from recognition. Gianni stood frozen. This was no longer theory, no longer speculation. Something living had connected to her, through her. He turned back to the screen. The machine had stopped printing characters. The last string it displayed stood alone. First key unlocked. 13 remaining. At that moment, his lights flickered. Then a low tone filled the room, the same resonance that had rung the bell. But now, it was coming from inside the laptop. Lucia pulled the EEG wires off. The signal died. But for a few seconds, she could feel something else within her thoughts. A presence. Passive. Ancient. And listening. Gianni rushed to pull the device apart, afraid the connection might re-establish itself. But before he could finish, the power cut. Complete blackout. Not just his house. The whole street. Down in the town square, emergency lights blinked on. Backup generators whirred to life. In the sanctuary courtyard, the soot-etched spiral began to glow. Blue. Soft. Pulsing. Then came the sound. Not a hum. Not a bell. But a voice. Not through ears, but through inward hearing. One word. Spoken not in language, but in thought. Receiver. Gianni stumbled back. Lucia clutched her head, gasping. The spiral flared once, then extinguished. And all was dark again. But the message remained, etched into the air, into them. The first lock was broken, and the archive had begun to open. The blackout lasted only 6 minutes. But in those 6 minutes, the town became unmoored from time. Security footage from Monte Sant'Angelo's main square skipped forward, as if 6 minutes had been edited out. Digital clocks in homes were frozen at 3:17 a.m., but analog ones had continued ticking. Lucia's hospital backup system registered no data loss, but patient monitors had all gone blank for exactly 360 seconds, and then returned with no alarm triggered. No memory of the lapse. No crash log. It was as though time had simply stepped aside. When the lights returned, the spiral on the sanctuary floor was gone. Not faded. Not erased. Gone. The stone was cold, clean, untouched. But the voice remained in their thoughts. Receiver. Lucia sat curled in Gianni's study, her knees pulled to her chest, whispering the word over and over. She wasn't afraid. She was processing. Gianni worked quickly, feeding the EEG data into an offline emulator, attempting to interpret the pulse that had overwritten the system. After 2 hours of parsing raw waveform structures, he found something. A repeating data burst encoded within the neural spike. He visualized it, and saw 13 nodes, orbiting a central spiral. A moving glyph. The emulator labeled it automatically. Event key, node 13. Lucia suddenly spoke, not looking up. It's the last one. Gianni froze. The last of what? She looked at him with eyes that were no longer entirely her own. The 13th node, she whispered. The others were silent. Some still are. But this one was chosen to be the final aperture. She blinked, dazed. They're not watching the Earth. They're watching through it. That evening, Gianni traced the supposed locations of the other nodes, from old logs, scraps of Amelia Neri's data, and the symbolic cartography now burned into Lucia's mind. One site in Siberia, one beneath the Pacific shelf, another hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient desert city in Tunisia. Each one associated with a moment in history where perception had fractured, mass dreams, unexplained disappearances, sudden technological surges in primitive societies. Monte Sant'Angelo's node, however, was different. It had not activated on its own. It had been unlocked. And somewhere in the mechanism of that unlocking, a countdown had begun. In the days that followed, people across the region reported strange occurrences. Travelers who couldn't find their way into town, GPS units looping endlessly. Locals finding themselves standing on streets they had no memory of walking to. One elderly man swore he left his home to feed the chickens and woke up 3 towns away, with no sense of time having passed. A fog began to settle, not in the air, but in the consistency of place. Space itself was bending subtly, like a lens focusing in on something too large to be grasped. Lucia, haunted but driven, insisted they return to the sanctuary. Not to observe, but to descend. Gianni protested. The chamber had been sealed. The passage collapsed, the tunnel entrance concreted over. No access remained. Lucia simply nodded, then handed him an old iron key. Gianni stared. Where did you get this? I didn't, she said softly. It was under my pillow when I woke up. That night, the two of them returned to the sanctuary. They waited until after the bells had stopped and the night was still. Then, without speaking, they approached the lowest door at the base of the chapel, a door thought to have been sealed since the Napoleonic era. Lucia reached forward, inserted the iron key. It turned. Effortlessly. The door opened with a whisper. Cold air spilled out, but not musty, not stale. Cold like something untouched by time. Gianni turned on his lamp. Lucia followed behind him. The tunnel twisted downwards, steeper than any staircase in the complex. The air pressure thickened. The stone became smoother, more uniform. As they reached the bottom, the passage widened. And they saw it. A chamber unlike the others. No crosses. No icons. Just a spherical room of perfect geometry, its walls marked with spirals, runes, and symbols pulsing with a blue glow beneath the surface, as if the stone had memory. As if it was dreaming. In the center stood a pedestal. Floating inches above it, a sphere. Perfectly translucent. Gently rotating. Lucia's breath caught. She stepped forward and placed her hand above it. The sphere flared, not with heat, but with recognition. And in that moment, their minds were no longer just their own. Images poured in. A lattice of worlds. Voices without mouths. Light that carried memory. And something else. watching through all of it, waiting for the final receiver to awaken. Gianni fell to his knees, overcome. Lucia stood tall. The sphere pulsed once more, then whispered in both their thoughts. Receiver linked. Network complete. Transmission begins. The chamber pulsed, not with light, but with intention. The blue spirals embedded in the walls began to rotate, not physically, but within their own dimension. Gianni couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. The geometry twisted inward and outward simultaneously, bending in on itself like recursive thought patterns given shape. It felt as if the chamber were breathing, thinking, responding. The sphere floated just above the pedestal, radiating a quiet hum that neither vibrated the air nor touched the ear, but somehow resonated in the marrow. Lucia stood motionless, eyes locked on the sphere. Her voice was calm, but hollow. It's not a message in the way we understand it. It's a bridge. Gianni wiped sweat from his brow. To where? To them, she said. Where are they? Lucia turned slowly toward him. Not where. When? Then the chamber shifted. The spiral patterns on the walls began projecting shadows, not onto surfaces, but into the air. Holographic forms bloomed mid-space. Swirling light condensed into structured images, ancient cities flickering like memories, maps that curved off the edges of the earth, vessels made of silk and metal drifting between stars and clouds. Gianni staggered back. These are records. Lucia nodded. We're standing in an archive of the impossible. As they watched, the images accelerated, cycling through epochs, showing creatures tall and thin with branching limbs and featureless faces, then great machines digging beneath planets, then humans, surrounded by spirals, holding spheres in their hands. Lucia's hands trembled. They've been seeding us. Memories, symbols, geometry, echoes in myths, recurring structures in language, recurring sequences in DNA. The spirals aren't decoration. They're instructions. Gianni gasped. They've been preparing us. No, she said. They've been preparing this place. She stepped forward and touched the sphere. At once, the chamber fell silent. The images vanished. The spirals froze. The glow died. And something entered. Lucia dropped to her knees, eyes rolling back, hands shaking. A voice filled the chamber, deep and layered, not singular but made of many tones at once. Some human, others not. Archive stream confirmed. Cross-node alignment achieved. Quantum lattice stabilized. Node 13, integrity acceptable. Commencing final projection. The walls darkened. The chamber seemed to stretch. Gianni felt his limbs grow heavy as if time itself were thickening. Then the voice continued, slower, more deliberate. This construct is a memory vault. A transmission vector placed within the convergent lithosphere of your world. It was placed before you, not for you. Gianni whispered. Then why now? The voice answered without hesitation. Because one of you heard it. Lucia began to speak, not with her own voice, but with something borrowed. Ancient. Measured. The lattice was fractured. The nodes were isolated. You were not meant to awaken the sequence. But now that it has begun, the protocol must be fulfilled. Gianni tried to stand, but the pressure in the air pushed him down. He asked, "What is the protocol?" The sphere pulsed again. Translation. Transference. Reunification. A shadow appeared behind the pedestal, a silhouette barely visible, shaped like a figure cloaked in light distortion. No features. No eyes. Just presence. The voice spoke again. Receiver, you are the vessel. Lucia gasped, suddenly awake. Her pupils dilated, her skin pale, but her voice steady. I can see it. All of it. They were never trying to reach out. They were trying to come through. The silhouette stepped forward, or perhaps only became more defined. Its limbs shimmered with faint spiral inscriptions that rotated slowly under its surface, as if carved into light. Gianni, overwhelmed, whispered, "Is it alive?" Lucia didn't answer. The chamber was now humming, gently rising in intensity. The sphere began to descend. The light inside it spun faster. The silhouette raised an arm, pointing at Lucia. "Receiver. Node 13 shall carry the archive into the Convergence." Lucia's body stiffened. Her hands rose without her command. Her skin glowed faintly blue, the same color as the chamber's spirals. Gianni screamed, "Stop! She's not ready." The voice replied with a chilling serenity. "She is the ready state. The archive will stabilize within her. She has been calibrated since birth." Lucia turned to him. Tears fell freely from her glowing eyes. "It's not possession," she said. "It's integration." Then the light flared. The walls contracted. The spirals spun so fast they became halos of solid energy. And the transmission began in full. Lucia screamed once, a cry that was not pain, but the sound of centuries condensing into a moment, and then her body lifted inches from the floor. The voice became many. "Node 13, complete." The sphere vanished in a burst of light, and Lucia fell still, levitating no more. She opened her eyes, and something else looked out. Lucia stood on her feet. But the woman who opened her eyes in the center of the chamber was no longer wholly the one Gianni had known. Her breath was slow, controlled, her face calm but distant, as though she were peering through the world rather than at it. The faint blue shimmer that had wrapped around her skin like fog began to dim, fading into her pores, vanishing as if it had always belonged there. "Lucia," Gianni whispered, "are you still in there?" She turned toward him. Her gaze was soft, human, but something inside shimmered, not hostile, not cold, but vast. A depth that had no floor. "I am," she said. "And I'm not." She stepped forward and touched the chamber wall. The spiral patterns responded instantly, resuming their gentle rotations, but now, slower, aligned with her breath. "I can feel them," she said quietly. "Not as voices, not as commands, as extensions, streams of data, memory, instinct, across time, across planets, thought lines older than our language. They've always been part of the lattice." Gianni looked around, lost. "What is the lattice?" Lucia turned to him, her voice layered now, like a harmony that traveled beneath her own. "It's not a structure. It's a mind. A distributed memory network cast across civilizations, across species. Each node holds part of the pattern, part of the totality." "And the spiral?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "The spiral is the signature of encoded convergence. It's how they seed minds, how they choose receivers." Gianni's knees gave slightly beneath him. He grasped the edge of the pedestal. "Why here? Why now?" Lucia walked to him. She knelt, took his hand. "Because you made the connection. You heard the pulse. You answered the call. Without realizing it, you activated the gate. I was the vessel, but you were the initiator." He stared at her. "Is this a warning? Or an invitation?" Her eyes drifted downward. "I don't think they see a difference." She stood again. The chamber's light changed, dimming in color, softening to a pale gray. The spirals stopped spinning. The patterns recessed into the stone like they were never there. The sphere was gone. The walls were just walls again. The transmission had ended. Lucia walked to the narrow corridor that led back to the surface. But when Gianni followed, he noticed something wrong. The tunnel was longer, much longer. He turned back to the chamber. It was smaller than before, almost compacted. "Lucia," he said, "how long were we in there?" She paused, then whispered, "I don't know. They ascended in silence. Stone turned to aged brick. Then old wooden rafters. Then stone again. The light changed from cold blue to warm yellow. Then to gray. When they emerged, they were no longer beneath the sanctuary. They stood in an overgrown courtyard, walls covered in moss and vines, a broken bell tower leaning in the distance, birds circling high overhead. It was Monte Sant'Angelo. But not. The streets were too quiet. The air too thin. Buildings stood where none had before. Others were gone. There were no people. No cars. No voices. Only the wind. Gianni looked to the sky. The stars were visible. Too many, too bright, as if the atmosphere had thinned or time had shifted. He reached for his phone. No signal. No date. Just static. Lucia didn't seem surprised. She walked to the edge of the town square and stared into the empty horizon. "They warned me," she said softly. "The lattice doesn't send messages across distance. It sends them across time." Gianni's breath caught. "You mean we've..." Lucia nodded. "We've stepped forward." Gianni fell to his knees, the realization a weight crashing into his chest. "How far?" She didn't answer. He looked at her and saw it in her face. She didn't know. Then, from the sky, a low hum began. Not the resonance of the chamber. This was different. Heavier. Lucia looked upward. Her eyes narrowed. "It's not just memory," she said. Gianni followed her gaze. High above, in the thinning clouds, lights began to descend. 7 points. In perfect spiral formation. They were coming. The lights fell slowly at first. 7 pale orbs, moving in quiet unity across the sky. They didn't burn. They didn't roar. They simply drifted, like dew sliding down the fabric of space itself. Their formation was exact, a spiral that widened and then contracted, adjusting to invisible vectors. Their glow wasn't white, or blue, or gold. It shifted, as if it were not made of light at all, but something deeper. A presence. Gianni stood motionless, staring upward, his mouth dry. "They're ships," he whispered. Lucia shook her head. "No. They're sentiences." The air around them began to change. Sound flattened. Every bird had vanished. No breeze moved the grass. There was only the hum, and the growing awareness of something impossible entering the atmosphere. The closest orb halted midair, hovering just above the old sanctuary's ruins. It pulsed once. Then again. The same rhythm they knew too well. 4 seconds. The spiral heartbeat. Suddenly, a beam of light descended from it. But it didn't touch the ground. It stopped 1 meter above the stone, forming a floating ring. Within that ring, space twisted, turned inward. A hole of motionless turbulence. Lucia took a step toward it. Gianni grabbed her arm. "You don't know what that is." She looked at him. "I am that." He shook his head. "Lucia, whatever you became down there, it doesn't mean you belong to them." She met his eyes. Something in her softened. "I don't," she said. "But I understand now. The lattice, it's not their creation. It's older. They just found it. Like us." The beam of light brightened. The turbulence within the ring began projecting images, flickers of memories not theirs. Gianni saw flashes of other nodes. Vast deserts. Oceans filled with floating cities. Planetary arches glowing under 3 suns. He saw other receivers. Human. Non-human. Each standing before a ring just like this one. Each transmitting. Each linked. Then he saw Earth. Not as it was now. As it would be. And something else. A great structure. Orbiting far beyond Earth's moon. Not a satellite. Not a station. A construct. Composed of the same spiral geometry they had seen underground. A mind forged in orbit. It looked back. The beam narrowed, focusing entirely on Lucia. The humming intensified, not louder, but deeper, resonating through thought and memory. She stepped into the light. Gianni shouted, but his voice was pulled away, not silenced, but delayed, as though time itself hesitated. Lucia's body glowed. Her skin illuminated with spiral symbols, the same glyphs that had once turned in stone now alive on her skin. She hovered, gently, weightlessly, and the beam began to ascend with her. She didn't resist. She didn't scream. She simply looked down at Gianni and whispered one final word. Remember. The orb absorbed her into its glow. And then, she was gone. The remaining 6 orbs shifted, repositioned, but they did not descend. They hovered in formation above the town, like sentinels awaiting command. Then came the voice again. Not from the sky. From within Gianni. Not words. Not sentences. A package of meaning, downloaded into thought. Node 13 complete. Network integration at 92%. Memory vector anchored. Remaining receivers unknown. Archive decoding in progress. He fell to his knees. What do you want from me? He whispered. The answer unfolded slowly, not as a command, but as a choice. You initiated the sequence. You remain the anchor. The lattice remembers through you. Then, the sky darkened, but not with storm or eclipse. Above, behind the spiral of the orbs, the stars began to vanish. One by one. A shadow, massive, distant, but moving, eclipsed the constellations. Not quickly. Not entirely. But deliberately. The air grew colder. The pressure deepened. And something ancient entered Earth's awareness. Not violent. Not invasive. Just present. The voice whispered again. The mind that was never singular has begun to wake. Gianni stood in the empty square, eyes wide, pulse silent, surrounded by forgotten time and remembered futures. And above him, the sky had already begun to change. Night fell, or at least, what Gianni thought was night. The light in Monte Sant'Angelo no longer followed natural rules. The sky glowed a shade of violet black, deep and bottomless, while shadows moved across walls as if cast by unseen suns. Time stuttered. Gianni checked his wristwatch 3 times in 1 minute. Each time, the hands were in a different position. The 7 orbs remained overhead, stationary in their perfect spiral. They did not blink. They did not pulse. They waited. For something. Or someone. But Lucia was gone. Her absence was not silence. It was void. Something had been removed from the world, and the hole she left behind refused to close. Gianni wandered the empty streets of the town, now warped at the edges. Windows no longer reflected properly. Stones vibrated underfoot with a pulse that seemed to mimic thought. The walls of buildings appeared to breathe, slowly inhaling and exhaling, imperceptibly shifting inward and outward. He passed a mirror nailed to the side of an old shop. For a second, his reflection blinked before he did. That was when he realized it. He wasn't just displaced in time. He was in between. This wasn't the world as it had been. And it wasn't the future, either. It was a holding space, a hollow, a pause in the mechanism of the lattice. He returned to the sanctuary ruins. The bell tower had crumbled, stones frozen in mid-fall as if caught in suspension. The air buzzed faintly, a white noise that shifted in pitch the closer he came to the center. Then, a voice. Lucia's. Inside his mind. But quieter now. Fragmented. As if sent from far away, or long ago. The spiral is not their symbol. It is the key we left behind. He whispered. We. You knew it before you were born. You saw it. As a child. In water. In branches. In the sleeping curve of your own DNA. He fell to his knees, gripping the cold stones of the sanctuary. Lucia, where are you? Everywhere. And nowhere. I'm being rewritten. Stabilized. The archive, It's older than they thought. It remembers things even they do not. Suddenly, the sky above him flickered, as if a vast sheet of fabric had been stretched and snapped in slow motion. The 6 remaining orbs, now without their 13th, began to move. But not downward. Inward. Gianni watched in awe as the spiral folded into itself. The 7-point lattice collapsed into a sphere, one that spun, then stretched, then cracked apart. What emerged from its center was not a ship, not a form, a hole, perfectly round, surrounded by light, but filled with nothing. A gravity of absence. Gianni instinctively took a step back, but he could feel it already, pulling not just at his body, but at his mind. Memories rippled. He thought of his mother's voice, his childhood bedroom, his first telescope, the taste of blood after falling from a bicycle at age 6. The hollow wanted his identity. Then another voice entered his mind. This one was not Lucia. It was vast, genderless, and full of cold resolve. Anchor identified. Final signal required. Gianni shouted. What signal? The sky bent. His breath stopped. Then, a shape began to form from the hollow, shifting like smoke-gathering mass. Slowly, it became a silhouette, tall, humanoid, its surface etched with spirals that moved of their own accord. Its head tilted, studying him with a gaze that did not need eyes. The voice returned. Identity transfer pending. Anchor must approve convergence. Gianni backed away. No, I'm not letting go. You already did. When you initiated the call. The moment you remembered the pattern. The entity raised its hand. And Gianni remembered. He remembered the dreams as a boy. Spirals in the sand, voices in rivers, stars that blinked back. He had always been tied to the pattern. It had followed him, protected him, prepared him. Lucia's voice returned, fainter now. You are not the final receiver. You are the last translator. Gianni whispered. Then what happens now? The entity stepped forward. Its body shimmered, flickering between physical form and data architecture. It reached out, palm up. The final glyph appeared, hovering above its hand. A spiral, nested inside another spiral. 13 points along the curve. It pulsed once. And Gianni understood. This was the moment. If he accepted the spiral, the transmission would complete. The lattice would unlock. The memory of countless worlds would flood through his mind, refracted through his humanity, unique, flawed, feeling. But if he refused, the convergence would collapse. The network would scatter. And humanity would be sealed out forever. The entity spoke once more. The archive does not need you. But it will remember you. Gianni stepped forward. He raised his hand. The glyph drifted down, merging with his palm. A rush of wind blasted through the hollow streets. The sky turned white. The spiral burned into his skin like ink made of fire and language. Then, silence. The light vanished. The entity dissolved. The hole in the sky closed. And Gianni fell into darkness. Darkness, but not the absence of light. Gianni floated in a stillness so absolute it defied time, weight, and shape. He couldn't tell if seconds were passing, or centuries. There was no breath, no heartbeat, only the slow spiral of presence, the sense that something immense was surrounding him, not watching, but waiting. Then came the first memory. Not his. A flash of a crystal bridge extending across a gas giant, suspended in the magnetic fields of its rings. Beneath it, beings of shifting form drifted through oceans made of liquid helium, each carrying spiral insignias inlaid into their translucent skin. Another flash. An ancient city under a red sun. Towers shaped like hourglasses. Children with violet eyes learning to dream as a form of communication. A catastrophe buried in heat and dust. A spiral drawn into the last wall of the last chamber before the stars went dark. Then, Earth. But older. Before the continents moved. Before mammals. A spiral carved into the seabed by something that did not crawl, but flowed. A signature left behind. A key waiting for ignition. Gianni was not absorbing images. He was becoming an index. A living root folder for memories that predated humanity. He felt languages pass through him like wind. Thoughts without bodies. Deaths without sorrow. Civilizations rising and vanishing like dust across a screen of stars. His body pulsed. He remembered who he was. Had to, or else he would be unmade by the weight of so much memory. He screamed. And then, he awoke. Flat on his back. In daylight. The sky above him was cloudless, a washed-out blue. Pale. Wrong. Monte Sant'Angelo surrounded him, but not as he knew it. The buildings were intact, but new. Ancient architecture, yes, but polished. The cracks were missing. The vines gone. The windows darkened, unbroken. There were no people. No sound. No birdsong. No wind. No machines. Gianni sat up. His hand burned. He turned it over. The spiral glyph was gone. In its place, a small dot. Faint. Like a scar. Like the ending of something ancient, sealed with a period. He stood. Looked around. Walked. Shadows moved, but too slowly. Like puppets underwater. The town square was filled with objects that should not have existed. Artifacts made of metal and bone. Machines powered by light with no source. Displays showing glyphs in constant motion. Statues of beings not quite human, elongated, spiraled, faceless. The same pattern repeated endlessly. He realized what had happened. He was in a simulation, but not artificial. A memory echo. A resonance of the archive using his own perception to render context. A space between the nodes. Then a voice returned. Familiar. Lucia. You're not dead, Gianni. But you're not fully returned, either. He turned toward the voice and saw her, standing beneath the bell tower that now gleamed like polished obsidian. She looked the same, but her eyes had no whites. Only soft, shifting spirals of pale silver. He ran to her, pulled her into an embrace. Her body was warm, alive. Lucia, he whispered. Is it really you? She nodded. I'm a fragment. A translated layer. The real me is still inside the lattice. He looked around. Where are we? She breathed in, slowly. We're in the threshold. The what? She pointed to the sky. A crack had formed. Not visible. Perceivable. A fracture in reality that didn't leak light, it drained meaning. This is where the lattice decides what passes through, she said. The memories that will shape what's next. Or what's erased. He began to tremble. Am I stuck? Lucia took his hand. You're the final translator. The last bridge. The anchor of the sequence. She lifted her hand and placed it gently against his temple. Images returned, but this time, they didn't overwhelm. Instead, they coalesced. 13 nodes. 13 receivers. 13 translations. And one convergence point. Lucia stepped back. You're going to forget. Gianni's chest tightened. What? It's the only way the transmission survives. It has to be buried. Not destroyed. Planted. Until the next one hears the pulse. He stepped away from her. I can't forget. Not now. Not after everything. You don't have to, she said. But someone else will need to remember through you. She reached into the space between them and pulled something from the air. A spiral. Made of light. Delicate. Living. Pulsing softly like breath. She placed it in his hand. This is the seed. The final echo. When it's time, it will awaken again. And Gianni smiled. for the first time since the transmission began. Because the lattice had done what it was always meant to do. It had passed the spiral forward. Years passed. The seasons turned like pages. Monte Sant'Angelo grew, changed, forgot. Roads widened. Tourists returned. The sanctuary was renovated, the bell tower restored. New families moved in. The spiral was never mentioned. And Gianni stayed. Not aging. Not changing. Not entirely there. He lived in the edge spaces of the town, a small stone house near the pines, where no one asked questions and no one remembered to ask his name. He taught astronomy at the local school under a pseudonym. He fixed radios that never broke. He listened to signals that never stopped. And he watched for the signs. The child, the boy who once stood atop the bell tower with the spiral stone, had grown. A quiet one, brilliant, drawn to patterns, to rhythm, to geometry. He didn't speak of dreams anymore, but Gianni saw it in his drawings. Spirals, circles, points of light arranged in sevens. Always 7. One afternoon, the boy brought him a notebook filled with sketches. "They move," he said, tapping the page. "I don't know how I know, but they do." Gianni nodded. "They're looking for something," the boy continued. "Or someone." Gianni looked out at the hills. The sky was unusually still. "They're looking for the next link." Then came the pulse. So faint, so low, it passed through the soles of their feet like memory. 4 seconds apart. The same rhythm. After all these years, it had returned. Gianni stood up, breath held, as static filled the edges of his mind. A soft ringing in the ears. A hum in the bones. The transmission was opening again. That night, he returned to the bell tower one last time. Alone. The town lay quiet beneath him, the stars impossibly clear. And then, one by one, they blinked out. Not from clouds. From presence. Above him, 7 lights appeared. But this time, they didn't descend. They hovered, waiting. And from the darkness, a shape emerged. Not a being. Not a vessel. A fold. In the sky. In time. In thought. And the voice, long silent, spoke once more. Node 0 confirmed. Origin point stabilized. Final convergence in progress. Gianni fell to his knees. He understood now. He had never been Node 13. That was Lucia. He was the 0 point. The anchor before the first. The origin from which the spiral would extend, always looking for minds open enough to receive. Lucia's voice returned, softer now, woven with countless others. "This is the spiral's purpose. To remember. To carry. To renew." Gianni smiled. Tears fell freely. "I'm ready." The lights flared. The sky cracked. And Gianni's form dissolved, not into dust, not into death, but into light. Into memory. Into every next dreamer who would one day look up at the sky, sketch a spiral in the sand, and feel the strange, beautiful echo of something older than time. The convergence was complete. The lattice remained. Waiting. Watching. And somewhere, a child would awaken. And the pulse would begin again.